In the dim light of a war-torn tavern on the outskirts of a distant planet, a group of seasoned mercenaries huddled around a table, their faces grim and their hands wrapped around half-empty glasses. They were a battle-hardened crew, having fought in countless skirmishes across the galaxy, and had earned a reputation for taking on the toughest jobs. But tonight, the tension was palpable, and an unease had settled in the air. "You heard the latest, right?" Jace, the leader of the group, leaned in and whispered, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the tavern. His eyes scanned the room nervously, as though afraid someone might overhear him. The others, equally uneasy, turned toward him. Jace's voice always commanded attention, even if it was a simple whisper. His reputation alone could quiet a room. "Deathworlder Special Forces," Jace said, and the mention of those words immediately drew silence from the mercenaries. The name alone made their hearts race, their palms sweat. It was as if a shadow had passed over the table, darkening their thoughts. "Don't be foolish, Jace. No one's ever actually faced them and survived," grunted Ryan, the group's sharpshooter, shaking his head. His hand nervously played with the rim of his glass. "We've heard the stories, sure, but those are just rumors. Who would be insane enough to take on the Deathworlders?" Chase's gaze hardened. "I'm not talking rumors. I'm talking facts. We've all heard what happened on Adoria 7. The entire mercenary team wiped out in a matter of minutes. They never had a chance." Ryan snorted. "That's just another myth to scare off the weak-minded. We've been hired to do jobs tougher than that. If anyone can handle it, it's us." The rest of the table murmured in agreement, though their faces betrayed their discomfort. Each of them had faced death many times before, and they had always come out alive. But the idea of facing the Deathworlder Special Forces was something entirely different. They were the galaxy's most feared elite soldiers, warriors who had survived on hostile worlds where every second of life was a struggle against death. Jace continued, his voice growing softer, more serious. "Listen, Ryan, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just telling you what I know. These guys don't just fight. They annihilate. And when they're done, there's no one left to tell the tale." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. It wasn't the first time they had heard of the Deathworlders. Every mercenary had heard the whispers, the rumors. But those rumors weren't just stories told by frightened civilians or desperate soldiers. The Deathworlders had earned their terrifying reputation through actions, real, brutal actions. One of the other mercenaries, Lyra, the group's tech expert, broke the silence. "They're not like us. They've evolved in environments we couldn't even imagine. Places so dangerous, so hostile, that only the strongest survive. I've heard they've survived planets with storms that can strip the flesh off your bones, creatures that could tear through steel with a single swipe of their claws. These are soldiers bred for survival, trained to fight in ways we can't even comprehend." She paused, her fingers tapping the surface of the table as she thought about her words. "I read reports from those who survived encounters with them. Not many, but enough to know how they operate. These soldiers don't just have advanced weapons and armor. They've got something deeper, instincts, the kind that make them almost unbeatable." Jace nodded, a somber expression crossing his face. "That's what makes them so dangerous. Mercenaries like us, we rely on our weapons, our skills, our technology. But they're the weapons. The way they fight. There's no hesitation, no fear. Every move is calculated. Every strike is fatal. And they never leave alive." Ryan leaned back in his chair, trying to mask his unease with a half-hearted chuckle. "I'm not scared of them. Not like you are. We've taken on worse, haven't we? Why would the Deathworlders be any different?" Jace stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He leaned over the table, his voice low and intense. "You don't get it, Ryan. This isn't like any other job we've done. This is something beyond us. When you face the Deathworlders, you face death itself. And it's not a fight you can win. They don't just kill you, they make sure you understand the terror before you die. Ryan's bravado faltered. He looked around at his companions. Every single one of them had heard the same stories. The Deathworlders didn't just defeat their enemies, they obliterated them. And the horror wasn't just in the aftermath, but in the way they fought, in the cold precision they brought to every kill. A long silence fell over the table. Each of the mercenaries was lost in their own thoughts, contemplating what Jace had said. No one wanted to admit it, but deep down, they all knew the truth. The Deathworlder Special Forces were the ultimate warriors, soldiers who didn't need to play by the rules because, for them, survival was never a question. It was a given. Jace sat back down, his gaze scanning the table as if he were waiting for someone to speak. But no one did. The weight of his words was too heavy to ignore. Finally, it was Lyra who broke the silence again, her voice quieter now, almost reverent. I've seen footage of their combat units. These guys don't just follow orders. They anticipate what their enemies are going to do. It's like they can read minds, predict every move before it happens. The mercenaries on Adoria 7 didn't stand a chance because the Deathworlders were always one step ahead. Ryan looked down at his glass, his mind racing. So, what do? We've got a job. A big one. And the client wants us to take down a Deathworlder unit. Jace sighed deeply, his hand rubbing his face in frustration. That's the thing. We can't turn it down. The money is too good, but we can't go in blind. We need to know everything we can about them. Every tactic, every weapon, every weakness. Lyra nodded. If there is a weakness, from what I've read, they don't have many. They're a breed apart. But if we're going to have any chance, we'll need to hit them fast, and hit them hard. And we need to be ready for anything. The group was silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. They had fought enemies on countless worlds, each one more dangerous than the last. But the Deathworlders were different. They weren't just soldiers. They were a force of nature, a living nightmare. And facing them wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a question of whether or not they would even have a chance. Ryan stood up, the determination returning to his eyes. We'll make it work. We always do. We're the best mercenaries in the galaxy, and we don't back down from a fight. Jace, though, wasn't so sure. He had led many missions, seen countless battles, but something about the Deathworlders made his blood run cold. We'll see, but when you face them, Ryan, you better be ready for more than just a fight. You better be ready for a nightmare. And with that, the mercenaries left the tavern, their minds heavy with what lay ahead. They had faced countless enemies before, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The Deathworlders were coming, and no one knew how it would end. The galaxy was vast, filled with millions of planets, each one home to different forms of life. Some peaceful, others more aggressive. But there were some planets so extreme, so brutal, that only the strongest life forms could survive. These were known as death worlds, planets where survival was a daily battle against deadly environments, monstrous creatures, and natural disasters. It was here, in these hostile realms, that the Deathworlders were born. On a planet known as Saltar, the air was thick with poison, the oceans were boiling hot, and the land itself was constantly shifting under violent earthquakes. The creatures that roamed the land were massive, with claws as sharp as swords and teeth capable of tearing through steel. The forests were filled with predators that hunted anything that moved, and the skies were darkened by storms that never ceased, rains of acidic liquid that could melt flesh within seconds. Life on Saltar was a constant struggle for survival, and only the most resilient could make it through even a single day. The Deathworlders were a species born of this chaos. They had evolved over millions of years to thrive in conditions that would kill any other creature. Their bodies had become stronger, more durable, and more adaptive to the deadly environment of their homeworld. The inhabitants of Taltar had developed natural armor-like skin that could withstand the acidic rains, muscles that could endure the constant gravitational pressure of their planet, and a level of intelligence that allowed them to outthink the most cunning predators. But it wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was survival of the deadliest. The Deathworlders weren't just born to live. They were born to hunt, to fight, and to conquer. The origins of the Deathworlder Special Forces began long before they became a military force. On Xaltar, there were ancient traditions of warriors who would rise up from the tribes to protect their people from the planet's many dangers. These warriors were trained in the harshest conditions, taught to fight from birth, and molded into elite soldiers. They would fight not only for their people, but also to prove themselves worthy of their place in the deadly world they inhabited. The first Deathworlder warriors were fierce, unrelenting, and feared by all who encountered them. They would take on the planet's most dangerous creatures, giant predators, enormous insects, and monstrous reptiles, and defeat them using nothing but their physical strength and natural cunning. They fought not for glory but for survival, and in doing so, they became the perfect killing machines. As their numbers grew, the leaders of the Deathworlders recognized the need for a more organized force. The tribes on Xaltar, though fiercely independent, were always at risk of being wiped out by the planet's hostile environment, or by other more dangerous creatures. The leaders began to gather the strongest warriors from each tribe, creating a unified force of elite soldiers. This force was trained not only to fight the beasts of their world, but also to fight other intelligent species that might come to their planet in search of its resources. Soon, the Deathworlder Special Forces were born, a highly disciplined, incredibly effective military unit that was feared throughout the galaxy. Their reputation spread like wildfire, and rumors of their terrifying efficiency in battle began to reach other planets. However, it wasn't until the first off-world encounter that the true scope of the Deathworlders' abilities became clear. The galaxy's greatest military powers had long ignored Xaltar, believing that the planet's inhabitants were nothing more than primitive creatures struggling to survive in an inhospitable environment. But when the Galactic Council sanctioned a mission to study the planet's resources, the Deathworlders' attention was caught. A group of explorers, scientists, and military personnel arrived on Xaltar, thinking they were well prepared to handle whatever dangers the planet might present. They were wrong. The explorers landed on the outskirts of a Deathworlder village, expecting to conduct peaceful research. However, they quickly found themselves in the midst of an ambush. The Deathworlders had been watching them from the shadows for days, waiting for the right moment to strike. The soldiers, equipped with advanced weapons and armor, thought they had the upper hand. But they didn't. The Deathworlders moved like ghosts, their instincts honed over centuries of survival in their brutal world. They knew the terrain better than any outsider, and their ability to track, ambush, and overpower their enemies was unmatched. The battle was over before it even began. The explorers, despite their superior technology and equipment, were wiped out in a matter of hours. The Deathworlders didn't leave a single survivor. Word of the massacre spread quickly, and the rest of the galaxy took notice. The Deathworlders were no longer just a legend. They were a real, tangible force that could not be ignored. Their skills in combat were unparalleled, and they had the advantage of knowing the most dangerous environments better than anyone else. No one could match their speed, strength, or tactical genius. And as their reputation grew, so did their notoriety. The galaxy soon realized that any attempt to invade or conquer Xaltar would be met with swift and brutal resistance. The Deathworlder Special Forces were not to be underestimated. Their tactical prowess, honed over generations of surviving on a death world, made them unstoppable. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to ensure their survival. Every battle was personal. Every fight was a matter of life and death. It was then that the Deathworlders began to expand beyond their homeworld. No longer confined to the harsh environment of Xaltar, they began to take on missions beyond their borders, offering their services as mercenaries for those willing to pay the price. Their reputation preceded them, and no one dared challenge them. They were the ultimate warriors, and they knew it. But what truly made them terrifying wasn't just their physical prowess or their knowledge of deadly combat. It was their unyielding resolve. The Deathworlders were not just soldiers, they were survivors, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that they remained the top predators in the galaxy. Their minds were as sharp as their weapons. But the galaxy was vast, and with new threats on the horizon, the Deathworlders knew that their greatest challenge was still ahead of them. As the reputation of the Deathworlder Special Forces spread, so did the number of enemies who would seek to take them down. The Deathworlders, however, were ready. They had survived their harsh homeworld, and they would survive whatever the galaxy threw at them. The first encounter with off-world forces had been just a warning. As they continued to conquer and defend, the Deathworlders grew more lethal, more efficient, and more terrifying. They were no longer just a force of nature. They were a symbol of what it meant to be the ultimate warriors. To face a Deathworlder was to face death itself. Their training was grueling, their tactics flawless, and their resolve unbreakable. Anyone foolish enough to challenge them soon learned the hard way. Deathworlders never lost. The galaxy would come to understand one simple truth. When the Deathworlder Special Forces came, they did not come to negotiate. They came to dominate. The air on the battlefield was thick with tension. The mercenaries had arrived on the desolate moon of Korax with one goal in mind: complete the mission and survive. But standing before them, ready for the battle, was the most dangerous force they had ever faced: the Deathworlder Special Forces. The mercenaries had spent days preparing, meticulously planning their assault. They had trained for this, prepared for every possibility. But no amount of preparation could truly ready them for the cold, calculated power of the Deathworlders. Jace, the leader of the mercenaries, stood at the front of his squad, his eyes scanning the barren landscape. The ground beneath them was rocky and uneven, a perfect spot for ambushes, but they had no choice. The target was here, and they had to take it. The mission was clear: take down the Deathworlder base and eliminate any survivors. The bounty was massive, but so was the risk. "They're out there," Jace said, his voice low and steady, though his hands were shaking. "Keep your eyes open. Don't underestimate them. No matter how prepared we are, they'll be one step ahead." The rest of the mercenaries nodded in agreement. They had faced plenty of dangerous enemies, but this time was different. This time, they were up against warriors who didn't just fight to win. They fought to survive, and they did it better than anyone. Lyra, the tech expert, activated her comms and connected to the team's equipment. "I got their position," she said, her voice calm but laced with tension. "They're in the northern ridge, using the natural terrain to their advantage. They know we're here." Jace tightened his grip on his weapon. "We move in. Now." The mercenaries formed up, moving swiftly but carefully through the rocky landscape, their boots crunching on the loose stones beneath them. The air was cold, the wind howling through the barren terrain. It felt as though the entire moon itself was holding its breath. They advanced in silence, eyes trained on every shadow, every crack in the rocks. But there was no sound, no sign of their enemies. It was unnerving. It was exactly what Jace feared. The Deathworlders were out there, waiting, watching, just waiting for them to make the first move. "Take cover," Jace ordered, snapping everyone out of their tense silence. They ducked behind large boulders, their hearts racing. The stillness was suddenly broken by the sound of a single sharp crack, a distant shot that echoed through the rocks. The battle had begun. The Deathworlder Special Forces were already moving, swift and silent, as if they had anticipated the mercenaries' every move. A group of them emerged from the shadows, their armor glinting in the faint light of the distant sun. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their guns raised, their bodies low to the ground. They didn't need to shout commands or make noise. They were already in position, ready to strike. "Get ready," Jace muttered, his voice barely audible. "We hit them hard, fast. We don't give them time to react." The mercenaries surged forward, weapons raised, but it was clear that the Deathworlders were already one step ahead. As they rounded a corner, a sniper shot rang out from the ridge, narrowly missing Ryan, the sharpshooter. The bullet hit the rock beside him, sending a shower of debris into the air. Ryan instinctively returned fire, but the Deathworlder sniper was already gone, disappearing into the shadows before he could even get a clean shot. "They're too fast," Ryan shouted, frustration creeping into his voice. Lyra, keeping her cool, activated her scanners, trying to pinpoint the sniper's location. "They're not just fast," she said, her eyes flicking across her readout. "They're adaptive. They're using our tactics against us." Jace's face tightened. "We need to move. We can't stay exposed like this." The mercenaries pushed forward again, trying to get to cover. But every time they made progress, the Deathworlders seemed to be right there, anticipating their moves. Another sniper shot rang out, this time grazing Jace's shoulder. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was enough to send a jolt of pain through him, reminding him just how dangerous their enemies were. "Take cover," Jace yelled, diving behind a boulder. His team followed suit, ducking behind rocks, trying to regroup. Their plan was falling apart fast, and the Deathworlders weren't even breaking a sweat. "They're too good," Lyra whispered. "They know exactly how to counter everything we're doing." Jace gritted his teeth. "We can't let them win. Not like this." Suddenly, a voice crackled through the comms. It was Ryan, his voice filled with panic. "They're flanking us. From the east." Jace's heart dropped. Damn it. They've already outmaneuvered us. The mercenaries were surrounded. The Deathworlders had closed in from every direction, cutting off any chance of escape. They were too well-trained, too precise. The mercenaries, despite their skills and experience, were being outplayed at every turn. A figure emerged from the shadows. A Deathworlder, tall and imposing, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. It was the leader of their squad, a soldier who exuded an aura of dominance and control. His armor was different from the others, more ornate, more refined, but his presence alone was enough to freeze the mercenaries in place. "End of the line," the Deathworlder leader said, his voice calm, almost detached. "You should have known better than to challenge us." Jace's mind raced. They had one shot, one opportunity to turn the tide. He had to act fast. "Now," he shouted. The mercenaries moved as one, rushing forward with everything they had. Their weapons blazed in the dim light, but the Deathworlders were faster. They dodged, weaving between rocks and shadows with an agility that was almost supernatural. Every time the mercenaries thought they had them in their sights, the Deathworlders were already gone, retreating into the darkness. It was a dance, a deadly game of cat and mouse. But the mercenaries were losing. They were too slow, too predictable. The Deathworlders knew exactly where they would be before they did. Chase fired his weapon, hitting one of the Deathworlders in the chest, but the shot barely seemed to faze him. The Deathworlder shrugged off the blow and returned fire, his weapon striking Jace in the leg. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay on his feet. "Fall back," Jace ordered, but it was too late. The Deathworlders closed in, and the mercenaries were pushed further into the open. No more cover, no more safe zones. The Deathworlders were relentless. Then, in a last-ditch effort, Ryan fired a shot that took out the leader's comms device. The Deathworlder leader staggered for a moment, his expression faltering. It was the only opening they had. "Push," Jace screamed. "Push now." The mercenaries rushed forward with everything they had left, a final burst of energy. The Deathworlders hesitated for just a second, but that was all the mercenaries needed. In that fleeting moment of uncertainty, they managed to break through the Deathworlder ranks, dragging them back. But the victory was short-lived. The Deathworlders regrouped quickly, and their counterattack came swiftly. The battle raged on, the mercenaries fighting for their lives against enemies who were always one step ahead. Jace, wounded and exhausted, knew that the mercenaries had underestimated the Deathworlders. They had faced many enemies before, but none like this. The Deathworlders weren't just soldiers, they were a force of nature. And when they fought, it wasn't about winning. It was about survival. As the battle continued, Jace realized that this wouldn't be an easy fight. The mercenaries weren't just up against the Deathworlders' superior skills and tactics. They were up against an enemy who didn't fight to win. They fought to make sure there was no fight left to be had. And that was something no mercenary, no matter how skilled, could ever truly prepare for. The battle had been going on for hours, and the mercenaries were running on fumes. Blood soaked their uniforms, their bodies bruised and battered from the unrelenting onslaught. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and the acrid stench of blood. Every movement felt like an effort, every breath painful. They had pushed as far as they could, but the Deathworlders were still there, an unstoppable force moving through the ruins like shadows. Jace staggered behind a pile of debris, his leg wounded and barely holding him up. His breath came in sharp gasps as he looked around. His team, his comrades, were scattered across the battlefield, pinned down by the Deathworlders' relentless fire. The mercenaries had given everything, but it wasn't enough. The Deathworlders didn't just fight. They adapted. They anticipated every move, every plan, outmatching the mercenaries at every turn. Jace's mind was racing, trying to come up with something, anything, that could turn the tide. But there was nothing. They were outgunned, outmoved, outfought. The Deathworlders' efficiency and precision were unmatched, and the mercenaries had underestimated them from the very beginning. Then, a voice came through the comms, breaking through the noise of the battle. It was Lyra, her voice calm but strained. "Jace, we can't win this fight. We're being hunted. They're too strong." Jace looked up, seeing the flashing lights of their enemies' weapons cutting through the smoke. The Deathworlders were already closing in, moving in synchronized patterns, their weapons raised, their eyes cold and calculating. The mercenaries were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. "No," Jace whispered, shaking his head. "We can't give up. Not yet." He tried to move, but his leg refused to cooperate. Pain shot through him as he collapsed onto the ground. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They had lost. It wasn't a question of if. They were already defeated. The only thing left was the end. "Jace," Lyra said again, more urgently this time, "we're not going to make it out of this. We need to retreat. We need to." "No," Jace cut her off, his voice hoarse. He had seen death before, but this was different. The Deathworlders had shown no mercy, no hesitation, and they weren't going to stop. They would wipe them out completely if given the chance. But there had to be something they could do. There had to be a way to survive. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath them, and a deafening roar echoed across the battlefield. A massive explosion tore through the air, sending shockwaves through the mercenaries' position. The world seemed to blur as the debris and smoke filled the air, temporarily blinding them. For a moment, everything was chaos. Through the smoke, Jace saw a figure emerge, a Deathworlder, taller and more imposing than the others, moving with terrifying confidence. The leader, the one who had orchestrated this battle, who had brought them all to this point. "Enough." The leader's voice boomed across the battlefield, calm and chilling. "Your resistance ends here." Jace struggled to get up, his hands shaking. You're not going to finish this. You don't get to win." The Deathworlder leader paused for a moment, his glowing eyes studying Jace with cold detachment. There was something in those eyes, something beyond the usual calculated cruelty. There was understanding. Understanding of the fight, of the struggle. For a brief moment, Jace thought he saw something like respect. "Do you think we want to win?" the Deathworlder said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "We don't fight to win, human. We fight to survive. That's the difference between you and us." Jace's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't just a battle for victory. It was a battle for survival, a battle driven by something deeper than the mercenaries could comprehend. The Deathworlders were not just soldiers. They were a force of nature, bound by the instinct to live and protect their people, to endure against the harshest of odds. They fought because they had to, because their very existence depended on it. The Deathworlder leader took a step closer, his massive frame looming over Jace. You think you're the only ones who know what it means to fight for survival. We've been fighting since the day we were born. We were shaped by the brutal world we come from. There is no victory unless we survive. There is no honor unless we endure. Jace looked up at the leader, his vision blurry from the blood dripping into his eyes. So, what now? He whispered. What do you want from us? The leader paused, his gaze lingering for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice softer, almost solemn. You fought well, better than most, but you were never going to win. I don't want anything from you. What you need to understand is that there is a difference between being strong and knowing how to survive. We've survived because we have no other choice. Jace could feel the weight of his words sinking in. The Deathworlders weren't just warriors. They were survivors. They fought not for glory or conquest, but for the right to continue breathing, to continue living in the harshest conditions the universe could throw at them. They fought because if they didn't, they would cease to exist. Get up, the leader said, offering a hand. You've learned something today. I won't kill you. Not here. Not now. Jace, battered and broken, looked up at the outstretched hand. He knew it wasn't a gesture of mercy. It was a recognition, a respect earned through the battle. The Deathworlders were not merciful, but they understood one thing, the will to survive, to keep fighting despite the odds. And in that moment, Jace understood them. With a grunt, Jace took the leader's hand, letting himself be helped to his feet. The other mercenaries, still scattered across the battlefield, began to slowly regroup. They were all alive, for now, but the cost was high. Many were injured, and the battle had drained them beyond what they thought possible. The Deathworlder leader stepped back, signaling to his squad to lower their weapons. He turned to Jace and the others, his gaze steady. You fought well. But remember this, never forget the lesson of survival. It's not about strength. It's about adaptability. It's about knowing when to fight and when to survive. And you. He looked at each mercenary in turn, his eyes lingering on the group. You are not ready for this war. Jace, despite the pain, nodded slowly. He knew the battle was over for now, but the war was far from finished. The Deathworlders had shown them a new way of thinking. They hadn't just lost, they had learned. And in a way, they had gained something far more valuable than any victory could offer. The mercenaries slowly began to retreat, their heads down, the weight of defeat heavy on their shoulders. But there was something else in their hearts, a new understanding. They hadn't come out victorious, but they had come out alive. And in the world of the Deathworlders, that was more than enough. As they moved back towards their ship, Jace glanced over at his team. We're not finished yet, he muttered, his voice filled with determination. We'll come back. And next time, we'll be ready. The Deathworlders watched them go, their eyes filled with something that resembled respect. The mercenaries had survived. And that, in the eyes of the Deathworlders, was the greatest victory of all.